Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today at the Science Not Silence Forum. My name is Matt Tranchen, and I serve as president of March for Science, and I have the privilege to introduce our co-moderators for the event, my dear friends, Hita Lakhani and Marie-Claire Graff. Ladies, how are you today?
Hi, Matt. Doing great. How are you?
Hey, MC. So, of course, you all serve as the global focal points for Youngo, the official youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. Together, we have created the Science Not Silence campaign, which is mobilizing the world to unite behind the Ipcc 1.5 degree report, which has been blocked at COP24 and COP25. But Hita, I'm gonna kick it over to you to highlight some really important partners.
Yeah, before we dive right into the incredible event, we'd like to take this moment to thank our amazing co-hosts, the Permanent Mission of Malta to the UN, the Permanent Mission of Fiji to the UN, EarthX, the Island Resilient Partnership, and of course, AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, which is not only the co-host for today's forum, but also an official co-organizer of the Science Not Silence campaign.
Yes, today we truly are an action-oriented event, thanks to AOSIS, as you already mentioned, who has been doing a lot of behind-the-scenes advocacy. And that's also why it's quite fitting that we kick off our event, and we have the privilege to be joined by His Excellency, Ambassador Webson, he is the permanent representative for Antigua and Barbuda, I always mispronounce this, to the United Nations, and he is also the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. I will be providing some opening remarks. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Thank you again, colleagues. It is my honor to welcome all of you to this really very important event of Science Not Silence Forum. It is particularly important to us to join partnerships with all of the groups and the permanent missions mentioned. We think it is important that civil society and government come together so that we can make a difference in this area. As chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, representing some 39 countries in the UN family, I open with a point that many of you already know, that as of today, the world is not on track. I repeat, not on track to achieve the 1.5 degree Celsius goal in the Paris Agreement that we all fought for. The small island populations, nations I represent, depend heavily on the world achieving this goal, for we are disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change. If we fail to achieve this, many of our islands may yet disappear. Ambition can no longer take a backseat at climate discussions like it did at COP24 and COP25, when the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees was not formally welcomed. The grim findings, my friends, of this special report has led to worldwide protests, with people, especially young people, crying out for their leaders to listen to the science and safeguard their future. Along with the other co-organizers, I am working to ensure that COP26 in Glasgow has a discussion about the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, informed by science. Fishing past the mishaps and welcoming this report paves the way for the recognition of the future Ipcc report, such as the upcoming sixth assessment report, which will outline human contribution to several crucial tipping points. This is really, really important, and I know I'm probably speaking to the converted, but we, as the converted, have to take the word out there to make it happen. There are currently 17 nations that have already joined the pledge to welcome the Ipcc 1.5 report at COP26 and ensure all decisions at the COP are in line with the report. However, it is imperative that all nations join us. We must listen to the science, and I urge every country to join us, for no one is safe from the effects of climate change. Immediate action is no longer an option, but requirement. If we are to preserve our planet and provide a flourishing environment for today's youth, people to grow up, my friends, we must do it now. The window for limiting warming, limiting warming to an average of 1.5 degrees is fast closing. Without it, our Earth will suffer catastrophic impacts. Friends, excellencies, colleagues, AOSIS governments are committed to the 1.5 degree goal, but we are only a small portion of the world's population. We can't do it alone. We implore all of you, leaders of other countries and the major emitters, to join us and be change makers in climate change. We ask that we all be part of the solution. Members of AOSIS hope that the Science Not Silence Forum will encourage all leaders to make decisions that are informed by science. I leave you, my friends, with this question. Will you stand with us in safeguarding the future of our youths, of our young people? We need all who can hear me to join me. I thank you.
Wow, Ambassador Webson, that was incredibly powerful and a call to action that I hope is heard around the world. I really appreciate you joining us, not just for those remarks, but for a few questions that some of our co-moderators have to build off your remarks. Hita, I think you can ask the first question.
Sure. Ambassador Webson, a few months ago, there was an NDC synthesis report. And this report revealed that the new national climate pledges will only cut emissions, I think, by about 2% over the next decade, unless science is recognized, let alone utilized to inform international climate negotiations. We risk national climate goals committed under the Paris Agreement to remain inadequate. What are your thoughts, and how best can we build momentum for the Ipcc 1.5 degree special report to be formally welcomed at COP26?
So Gita, I lost the middle part of your question. My internet is fluctuating. So could you repeat the middle, especially the middle part of your question?
Sure. I was just saying that the NDC synthesis report has revealed that the emission cut over the next decade by the country's climate pledges is only about 2%. So this is very inadequate to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. And how can we build momentum for the IPCC 1.5 degree special report to be formally welcomed at COP26?
So I will say to you that I was speaking with my colleagues and team members just yesterday. And what we recognize is that we no longer could say we're just going to speak truth to power. Small islands can no longer just be squeaky. We have to speak truth, not just truth to power. We have to bring the conversation where it really matters so that we can get people to truly understand that we must do something. We will encourage at COP26, we have been speaking to our colleagues from the UK to have this matter be brought to the table, and we will encourage them to do so. But we as small island states will become a more, rather than just be accepting of positions, we are going to have to demand and push harder for the positions. And groups like yours are going to be essential in helping us in that demand. No governments can just do it. It is the civil society and groups like yours that are truly going to help to make that difference. Not sure if I got all of your question and got it correct.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much for that response. Thank you.
Yeah, also thank you so much, Ambassador Webson, for finding so accurate words before, right? And we hear you from the Yango, from the youth constituency, very loud and clear, and we are standing behind, and we will try our best in the lead up and at COP to ensure that more countries will join and really take these actions needed based on the best available science. So over the last 30 years, IOSIS has helped turn an environmental campaign into a global climate movement through its public advocacy and effective diplomacy. Can you talk about the importance of youth leaders in the movement and how IOSIS especially is empowering young climate warriors from all over the islands in the fight to address the climate crisis?
All right, so I have a pretty poor internet connection here. I'm actually in the islands. And so I'm going to ask you to repeat, especially towards the end of your question. I was losing it. Could you do that?
Sure, no worries. We have been already experiencing the internet issues right at the subsidiary body meeting, a big challenge. So can you talk about the importance of youth leaders you have been already mentioned before, and especially also how IOSIS is empowering young climate warriors to fight and address the climate crisis?
Okay, so first of all, I will begin to say, I'll pick up where you started in your when you were responding, when you were building on Gita's first question. And I don't think IOSIS, and certainly with my leadership style, want youths to be behind us. I want the youth voice to be with us, beside us, and even before. And the reason for that is that in your countries is one of the most powerful voices that governments must listen to. First of all, by simple numbers, right? So what we have to do as IOSIS, and what we will do together with young people, is training, educate, so that we can become equipped to be advocates and youth champions, climate champions as young people, working with us. I want, when I speak, to be able to point to young people. So I hope that every island and then every country would bring youth to COP26 so that we can do something at our pavilions and do something in the meetings where the voices of youths can be heard. IOSIS has long championed the causes, and we have gotten voices involved. We need to get more of our own voice. One of the things I might tell you that we are working on right now is a podcast series, and my colleagues back in office may very well speak to some of you guys, so that, because we know as we use social media and podcasts and so on, we get more young people engaged.
Thank you, Ambassador Webson. And a final question before you depart us, sir. Of course, As chair of AOSIS, you have established 3 goals during your tenure as chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. The first goal is amplify SIDS leadership. The second, support the transition to implementation. And the third is strengthen AOSIS operations. Certainly over the last 6 months during your tenure, you all have certainly amplified SIDS leadership at virtual forums and the development of your digital outreach. And AOSIS continues to spearhead support of SIDS as they try to convert their climate action plans to tangible climate solutions. But with regard to the third goal, strengthening AOSIS's capacity, its ability to be an effective advocate, not just on behalf of island nations, but on behalf of the world, for everyone who's tuning in right now. And we have a very interesting mix of viewers, from science advocates to youth climate leaders to government officials to philanthropists and environmentalists. For people who are tuning in right now, how can they support that third goal? How can we support strengthening AOSIS operations so that you all can achieve success on behalf of us all?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our objective is partnerships. So building partnerships, firstly, emanating from our headquarters is one thing, but building partnerships on the ground with local grassroots movements and organizations is very critical, because the change is not going to happen from New York offices. Any change is going to happen from the ground in countries. Our youth participate, they vote, they act, and so on. And these are the people who we want to build partnerships with. So I would say, in response to your question, it's about partnerships. It's about working with us to sharpen the tools of advocacy so that we can help the partner groups, and the partner groups can reach out. Using the internet and using social media, we can build a very powerful AOSIS reach and be able to use that advocacy leading up to and after COP. It must not stop at COP26. One of the things that we tend to do in international work is we tend to stop at the big events. The big event is the occasion of national focus and international interests. But when the big event is done, we then turn to the next big event. We have a big event all the time. The climate, the disaster that we are confronting is not going away. The clapping and applauding in COP26 and other COPs do die. Climate crisis won't die unless we do something. And we have to continue to march beyond COP26. And that's what AOSIS hopefully can stimulate and can join partners to do as we strengthen our partnerships with small island states.
Well, thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us. And I will say, in terms of the team that you've built at AOSIS to achieve that objective, from Leah to Claxton to Tashwa to Ismail, you've got an extraordinary team that has been so incredibly supportive behind the scenes to make this event successful and the campaign effective. So thank you, sir, for that. And for everyone tuning in order to get involved with AOSIS and support their efforts, you, of course, need to be following them on social media. Their Twitter accounts and Instagram handle is AOSIS_chair. So please follow them and do more than follow. Step up, get involved, and find ways to support them. Ambassador, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good luck with the rest of the program.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
With that, it is now my privilege to introduce our next speaker, and Her Excellency Ambassador Vanessa Fraser from the Permanent Mission of Malta to the United Nations. She was unable to join us live, but she was gracious enough to provide some pre-recorded remarks for today's event. So with that, we look forward to hearing her words.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I join you in my capacity as permanent representative of Malta to the United Nations and co-chair of the UN Steering Committee on Partnerships for Small Island Developing States, together with my colleague, Ambassador Webson of Antigua and Barbuda, and chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. I am honored to welcome you all to the Science Not Silence Forum, a forum created out of the desire to achieve formal recognition for scientific evidence around climate change in international debates. Together with AOSIS, the Permanent Mission of Fiji to the United Nations, YOUNGO, March for Science, EarthX, the Island Resilience Partnership, and our own mission, the Permanent Representation of Malta to the United Nations, we are pleased to be convening today's event held at this year's High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, HLPF. Our meeting today is a testament to our commitment that science is to lead the way, and that if not act now, climate change will lead us towards unprecedented consequences. Reputable reports, such as the Ipcc Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees, brings to the fore the complex challenges related to climate change, particularly for small island and developing states. Climate action in the form of adaptation and mitigation are crucial to allow us to invest in long-term resilience. Research and innovation will be key allies in this respect. The Paris Agreement is our international legal framework to travel in this direction. The global transition induced by the Paris Agreement is fostering international collaborations and sound competition among leading economies, leading to more trade, more investment, more innovation, and more job creation. The benefits of moving beyond the obsolete and harmful carbon economy are many. This should therefore encourage us to set the bar higher. The submission of new and revised nationally determined contributions, NDCs, that are aligned with the 1.5 degree goal is the bare minimum we should achieve. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has diverted many resources, but it has also given us the opportunity to reassess our relationship with nature and invest to bring our economies back to life with a view to pave the way to accelerate the transition towards climate neutral and resilient societies. All of this cannot be achieved by governments alone. We are inspired by our youth who are joining in the climate effort and holding leaders accountable for the well-being of our planet and future generations. We are thus grateful for the continuing support of YOUNGO. I would also like to highlight that Malta's youth have been instrumental in having our Parliament agree unanimously on a climate emergency in 2019. Malta has, since the last COP, included a youth representative in its delegation. Additionally, Malta has continuously acknowledged the importance of climate action towards all strata of government, and for this reason, we have a climate ambassador who leads our national and international efforts on climate action. We are proud and honoured to have with us Ambassador Professor Simon Borge, Malta's Climate Action Ambassador, who will also join us today for a live discussion. As small island states, we need to work together for our voice to be stronger, so that we may continue to add to an increasing momentum towards a successful COP26 in Glasgow this year. It is in this light that Malta is proud to join others in signing to the Science Not Silence pledge to spearhead an international call for increased climate ambition by reinforcing the importance of the Ipcc 1.5 degree report. We call others to join this pledge so we can unite behind the science and ensure that the Ipcc special report is formally welcomed at COP26. Let us act now. It is only by raising our climate ambition and goals that we can safeguard a better world for us and for future generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Fraser, for those remarks. We mentioned the support of AOSIS in helping make this event possible, but the permanent mission of Malta to the United Nations has really been a tremendous advocate for making this forum possible today, but also supporting the Science Not Silence campaign behind the scenes with their diplomacy and advocacy. But I wanted to talk about really the historic role of Malta's climate action. So before we bring on our next distinguished speaker, I think most climate advocates are probably familiar with the landmark 1982 Convention on the Law on the Sea, which first established the notion of the seabed and ocean being the common heritage of mankind and really being a resource for the benefit of mankind as a whole. But what I think many people don't know, and I count myself in this group until about a few days ago, was that this was a movement 15 years in the making, which began when Dr. Pargo from Malta originally requested that an agenda item be added to the 1967 United Nations General Assembly. That agenda item was subsequently carried through as the UNGA resolution on the common heritage of mankind. And so, for nearly half a century, Malta has been engaged as an innovative climate leader that has spearheaded the kind of global advocacy that leads to transformative change. And so there's perhaps no better current example of Malta's innovative climate leadership than its establishment of an ambassador for climate action, demonstrating its commitment to prioritizing the climate crisis and ensuring that climate action is integrated throughout government. Hita, we have such a special guest, don't we?
Yeah, that's exactly why we're so honored to bring on our next guest now, Professor Simon Borg, Malta's Ambassador for Climate Action. Ambassador Borg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, thank you all. I am very honored to be with you. I am actually, I wish to apologize for not being able to connect with my camera because I'm on holiday in Portugal and we have some problems with the connection from the browser, which is not mine. So I apologize for that. But I've been following the discussion. I've been following the passionate plea of the permanent representatives, Webson and Vanessa Fraser from my home country. And as you rightly said, Matt, Malta has been on the forefront in alerting the impacts of climate change within the United Nations General Assembly way back in the 80s, when the first scientific reports started making headlines on newspapers, because in reality, scientists had been talking about climate change for quite some time. But in the mid-80s, close to the ozone layer problem and the landmark treaties that where the international community rose to the occasion and was able to conclude an agreement to fight ozone depletion, then we had Malta felt that the issue of climate change should be brought to the fore, should be brought to a political forum, the highest political forum, which is the United Nations General Assembly. And since then, we never looked back. So this is really a special occasion for us to make an appeal to all those countries to listen to science, because it is really what the only solution to face this challenge, which humanity has never had to face before. And unless we really listen to what the Ipcc, which is really, the report reflects the best scientific minds, what they have been researching and what they have been modeling and making the predictions, the scientific predictions that we need to listen to be prepared.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ambassador Borg, also for joining in your vacation, this dedication. Thank you so much for supporting us even when you have your free time. So can you please talk about the significance of a country establishing an ambassador for climate action, and how has your role helped inform a coordinated response to the climate crisis, and how have you been seeing that you could make a difference through this very significant role?
Yes, it has made a difference. I was appointed the climate ambassador for Malta way back in 2009. I succeeded a very prominent ambassador who was for a very long time the executive secretary of the UNFCCC. That is Michael Zammit-Kutayar. He was the first executive secretary. He was also Maltese. And when he retired from his role, the government appointed him as ambassador for climate. And I had worked a bit with Michael for quite some time. And so when he again retired from being Malta's ambassador, I was appointed. And I think it was crucial right from the start to understand that being a climate ambassador, one had to work very hard on the international level, but also on the national level. Because whatever, and I think it was the permanent rep Webson who said this, that one cannot just work in international fora, but each and every government and each and anybody really has to, in order to facilitate climate action, we really have to work at the grassroots. We really have to facilitate dialogue at the national level, because at the national level, people will voice their concerns and their governments would listen to their concerns and would feel more ready to take the difficult decisions, the more challenging decisions that need to be taken to follow the science of climate change. And then they will be more eager in international fora to take the difficult decisions and to be promoters of climate action rather than to, drag their feet sometimes or prolong decisions. So the role of an ambassador for climate is very important, because climate change is also very cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary. So an ambassador helps even to coordinate the various opinions of ministries on a national level. You have the Ministry for Energy, Ministry for Environment, Ministry for Finance, Ministry for Transport, for example. These are all very much involved in taking the right decisions to follow climate science, as we know, for mitigation and even for adaptation purposes. So the role of a climate ambassador, since it's a very horizontal role, is precisely to facilitate this kind of coordination.
Ambassador Borg, I just want to jump in and point out that it's been fascinating to watch other governments follow Malta's lead since you all took this pretty historic step over a decade ago. Most notably, the United States. The Biden administration has really made it a point to ensure that there is a climate czar, for lack of a better word, in every department and agency across the federal government, to really do that kind of government-wide coordination that you yourself have been spearheading with Malta. So It's exciting to watch the impact that you all have had begin to scale around the globe.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. I think it's definitely it's a great step to be taken, and I think should be replicated in other countries as well, and see how we can build up and from the lessons learned and the good practices so far. Ambassador Borg, I have a question for you. For nearly a year and a half, the world has been in the midst of a global pandemic, and for so many, this has resulted in the climate crisis not really being prioritized that much anymore. Can you discuss how climate action should remain a priority, not just in spite of COVID, but because of it and its consequences? We welcome lessons that can be drawn from the global response to the pandemic and parallels between the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change.
Thank you, Hita. I think the biggest lesson we learned from COVID is that we must listen to science. And whenever we've listened to science, measures were taken and they were more effective than when we ignored science, especially in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when a number of countries were reluctant to take measures. Those that listened to science and took the measures immediately fared much better. So I agree with you. We cannot stop climate action because we have to recover from the impacts of COVID first. And I mean, especially the economic impact, the socio-economic impact. I think it's really very important to learn many lessons from COVID because there's a lot of similarity. For example, the linkages with science is one of them. The importance of taking decisions even at the from a precautionary perspective, even when we don't know all the information, when we don't have all the scientific information available. The need to be very supportive for each other. I think those countries that were mostly successful when dealing with COVID were those where you had a sense of a community pledge, where people helped each other, where stakeholders helped each other to recover from the COVID impacts. And we still see this today. So I think a great lesson learned is that we are all in this together. And if it's the civil society, but also businesses, but also the academia that has to help, governments, NGOs, and particularly the younger generation, which is, after all, the ones that have most at stake in making sure that climate action is effective. And it's the same with COVID, in the sense that what kind of a better world are we now going to build now that we have passed, or rather we're passing through this pandemic? Any form of recovery has to not repeat the mistakes we did in the past, like unsustainable economic growth, for example. We are not against economic growth, far from it. But we think that economic growth should include also sustainability, social cohesion, social justice, and obviously especially respect for the environment, for the natural resources that we need to live a decent life.
And Ambassador Borg, are you hopeful that those lessons have resonated with leaders around the world?
Well, I have to be hopeful because losing hope is, giving up is not an option. Yeah. So, and as long as I live and having participated in this wonderful meeting, seeing so many people that are really determined to make a difference, I think it's up to us to keep on pushing for this message that we really need to change our ways. That with COVID, we've learned that we cannot proceed business as usual. We need to stop and think and say, we have to make a change to have a more just world and a better environment, better quality of life, better social justice across generations, across all countries. And I think it is a message that so many people, I would say the vast majority, endorse. And I think it's up to us, and this is what I like most about the younger generation, that they don't just complain, but they also give proposals on how we can change, how we can achieve this balance between economic growth and taking into consideration respect for the environment, taking into consideration climate action. We cannot look at fighting climate change as a burden, as just a way of suppressing our economic development. We have to look at it as an opportunity for innovation, for a new way of generating energy that is clean, that is accessible to all, and where we respect our resources to make them, sustainable for generations to come. And I think that is the biggest lesson we have learned. And I hope that we continue to make a difference and drive the change.
Well, Ambassador Borg, to that point of making a difference and driving the change, Malta was one of the first countries in the world to formally join the Science Not Silence campaign, and not only pledged to support the report being formally welcomed at COP26, but actively engaging other countries to secure their support as well. And I want to take just a note to highlight Francesca from the Permanent Mission of Malta to the UN, who has been an enormously effective and supportive ally toward that end. But I guess the final question for you before we release you and allow you to go back to your holiday, which you've graciously departed from in order to join us, is, as we head into COP26, what do you think the significance of the IPCC 1.5 degree report formally being welcomed would actually have with international climate negotiations?
I think it was definitely the goal. It presents a goal for the kind of revision we need to undertake for our NDCs to make them effective. It presents the goalpost, so as to say, that how we need to work to achieve that goal, and it will keep us on our toes to keep revising the NDCs as the Paris Agreement allows and provides, because the Paris Agreement is a very flexible instrument, but it has, one must pinpoint that the Paris Agreement had made it compulsory that NDCs can only be revised and made better. There is no backsliding. Backsliding is not allowed. So I think having the IPCC report endorsed by the COP would definitely be very significant in ensuring that the NDCs keep on track. That is, I think, the very valuable option of having the IPCC report endorsed officially.
No, I love that, Ambassador Borg. It's almost redefining success, for what the NDCs are trying to accomplish, need to accomplish. Well, look, with that, thank you so much, Ambassador Borg, for joining us. It meant a great deal that you were able to participate in the Science Not Silence Forum. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, and I wish you all the very best. And we're in this together, so we'll keep on fighting for it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
And now our next speaker, it was scheduled to be Mr. Abdullah Shahid, the incoming president of the General Assembly for the 76th United Nations GA. Unfortunately, due to scheduling conflicts, he's unable to participate. But fortunately, we have the distinct pleasure of being joined by Her Excellency Ambassador Tilmiza Hussein, permanent representative of the Maldives to the United Nations, and who was recently appointed as a special envoy to the PGA, the president of the General Assembly. She's agreed to join us for a live discussion, and we couldn't be more thrilled. Hello, Ambassador Till.
Hello. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone who is viewing this program today.
Hello, Ambassador Till. It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
I
As
have,
we,
sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
sure. No, sorry, I think it's my internet. It's lagging a little bit. Sorry, please go ahead.
I have had the pleasure of listening to the conversation for the past hour, and this has been a very rich discussion. So thank you for organizing this event and for having me here.
Of course. Hita, do you want to kick off the first question? Oh, I'm sorry, Ambassador. Did you want to follow those remarks up?
Yeah. Would you like me to start with a few remarks and then followed by questions, or whichever one you prefer would be at your disposal?
No, please, Ambassador, please kick it off, and then we'll follow up.
Great, thank you once again, and it is my distinct pleasure to join you today on an issue that is very, very close to home for the Maldives. And I'm speaking, of course, about addressing the greatest challenge of our times, which you have been discussing for the past hour as well. Climate change is a threat multiplier, cross-cutting and all-encompassing. It is imperative that we follow the science and take urgent steps to limit warming to well below 1.5 degrees Celsius. I'm proud that the Maldives has formally joined the Science Not Silence pledge, and I'm heartened at the pace at which this effort has gained momentum. I look forward to continuing to build as we head to COP26 in Glasgow this November. Excellencies, friends, Maldives, like other small islands, is at the front lines of climate change. And we heard Ambassador Webson talk about this a lot as well, a little bit earlier. We have been sounding the alarm for decades, along with other small island developing states. And now, regardless of where we are on the planet, from our small islands to big cities, forests, deserts, or the Arctic, no one is left untouched by the far-reaching impacts of climate change. Of course, there is value in sharing experiences faced by those on the front lines of climate change. But we need to move beyond sharing the different dangers we are facing and truly commit to making the necessary collective changes that we need to make to protect our people, planet, and for prosperity. There is undeniable danger in underestimating the pace and the reach of the impacts of climate change. Ambivalence will result in dire consequences. It will result in loss of lives, it will result in loss of livelihoods, and loss of nations. The Ipcc 1.5 degrees Celsius special report makes it clear that we are not responding with the urgency and ambition that this moment requires. Paris Agreement, of course, is a milestone achievement, but to ensure it is effective, we must work together to drive more action. We must work with urgency to reduce our emissions while simultaneously build resilience. As today's discussions emphasize, our response must be grounded in science. In the Maldives, we have worked hard to build our scientific capacity to ensure we can be resilient to climate change impacts. This has been a significant undertaking. For example, our population is spread across hundreds of islands with their own unique geography and circumstances. We have to ensure there's coastal protection, robust infrastructure, and water security for each of these islands. And we need to create science-based plans for each situation. Similarly, we are also looking at how we can adapt our agriculture to the hotter days and changing droughts and rain patterns that are a result of climate change. By understanding these causal links, we can better formulate appropriate responses grounded in science. Excellencies, friends, for much of my life, and for as long as I've been a diplomat, my work has been focused on addressing and drawing attention to extreme vulnerabilities of small island developing states to the effects of climate change. And I am heartened by the progress we have made on climate change awareness and welcome the enthusiastic engagement of today's youth on this issue, as they are vital stakeholders in ensuring they have a healthy planet on which to prosper. Discussions like today renew my spirit, inspire me, and fortify my commitment to our collective effort to address climate change. For us islanders, giving up hope is not an option. Thus, we remain optimistic while we continue to work hard. I'm committed to working with you to build a resilient world for us today, for our children, and for future generations. I look forward for the rest of today's forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for everything that you do. It's definitely very, very inspiring and also very heartening to hear your commitment, not just for yourself, also for the youth, and leading with all the other small island states on this very important side of our generation. Ambassador, can you talk a little bit about the significance of the Maldives, a small island developing state, being elected as the president of the General Assembly?
I think if you look at in the global context where we are today, we are at significant crossroads. We are faced with a pandemic and we are grappling with the impacts of climate change. And the global community, as we recover from this pandemic and then we start rebuilding, and many of our countries have lost gains that they have made towards achieving SDGs. I believe this is a unique moment for us to seize this moment and to ensure we build better, stronger, and greener and bluer. Today, we are 5 years into adoption of Paris Agreement and just 4 months away from COP26. COP26 presents our last best chance to raise ambition in order to close the gap between our national targets and the goals set out in the Paris Agreement. And small island developing states are not only in the front lines, but also have led the way by action and by always taking the moral high ground. So we hope a small island developing states like the Maldives, sitting in the helm of the General Assembly, will help bring moral clarity to the discussions and further highlight the urgency of the issue.
Thank you so much for this response, and we're very much looking forward also continuing working with you and the Maldives throughout this year. So previously, you actually co-founded Voices of Women, a Maldivian organization working on issues of women empowerment, human rights, and climate change. Very inspiring. So how has this experience informed your diplomacy and your global advocacy now that you will be representing the PGA and are responsible for mobilizing world leaders around transformative change?
Working with grassroots organizations and people on ground and seeing very closely the impacts of issues we discuss on these global platforms, what the impacts that these issues have on people's lives, gives you a 360-degree perspective, a very unique perspective. Thus, of course, it motivates me to be more passionate in driving these processes in the global platforms forward to bring transformative changes. Yes, sometimes these processes take very long time, but it reminds you every day the importance of why we need to push and be ambitious and why we cannot give up. And also the importance of engaging with civil society and the grassroots organizations, building partnerships and various other stakeholders in the discussions we have in the international forums.
Ambassador Till, I want to, again, thank you again for joining us on such short notice. One final question for you before we let you go. The Maldives, of course, were one of the first countries to join the Science Not Silence campaign. In fact, we announced the Maldives joining this campaign with you when you joined us at our side events at the UNGA last September. So loving the full circle moments that we're having right here as you are heading into the incoming PGA. But I guess, small island developing states make up less than 1% of the world's carbon footprint. SIDS continue to lead the climate movement on the global stage. Of course, I think when most people think about climate action, there's a tendency to think about it in the context of climate mitigation. But of course, climate adaptation, certainly as it relates to SIDS, is significantly, not perhaps as important, even more important. As you begin to work with the PGA, the incoming PGA, to preside over the 76th United Nations General Assembly, what are some of the goals that you all have that you believe are attainable over the next 12 months?
Thank you, Matt. And for us to join the Science 1.5 Science Not Silence was a no-brainer. In fact, Maldives was among some of the countries who many years ago in the UNFCCC process was in the forefront calling for this report. So we were glad to see the scientific report out on 1.5 degrees. So it wasn't difficult for us to join, and it was my pleasure and honor to be the one representing my country as we joined and took part in the discussion last year as well. Coming to the role of the PGA, the role of the PGA is really a unique role. It is to facilitate discussions and try to find convergence on issues. PGA does not make unilateral decisions on his own. So the President of General Assembly is at the disposal of the membership. And it is a membership-driven body. General Assembly is a membership-driven body. But what we hope to see is to see greater convergence in the General Assembly and greater political will in addressing climate change, in closing the financing gap, in addressing the urgent adaptation needs, and to ensure that we stay well below 1.5 degrees Celsius to stay alive. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador Till, I think we'd all be hard-pressed to think of another diplomat who could be as effective as you in making that convergence possible. So we're so thankful that you joined us, and we wish you and the incoming president, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, all the success in the world as you mobilize the global community to unite behind the science and achieve success for us all. Thank you, Ambassador Till, for your time.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to continuing this discussion over the years.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I had some issue unmuting. Matt, I think by now our viewers have probably picked up on the theme from today's Science Not Silence forum, that island leaders are now, but have always been at the forefront of the climate movement. Our co-host EOSIS has been spearheading this effort for over 30 years now. And that is why we are so privileged to welcome our next two speakers who've played such an instrumental role in EOSIS climate advocacy.
Absolutely. Yeah, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Fuller, Permanent Representative of Belize to the United Nations, previously the Chief Negotiator of AOSIS, and Ambassador Friday, former Chair of AOSIS from 2006 and 2008, when he served as Permanent Representative of Grenada to the United Nations. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to see Ambassador Friday once again.
Great to see you too, Ambassador.
Okay, let's dive right into this conversation then. Ambassador Fuller, let's begin with you. Belize served as the previous chair of the AOSIS from 2019 to 20. During this time, you served as the AOSIS's chief negotiator. How did the pandemic impact climate negotiations? And what best practices or lessons learned from this international response to COVID-19 could inform how the global community should collectively respond to the climate crisis?
Thank you. Well, obviously, the COVID pandemic and the international response to the pandemic really shut down climate change negotiations. We were unable to meet in 2020, and in 2021, we were able to meet once within the UNFCCC process at the subsidiary body sessions for SUBSTA and the SBI. Unfortunately, many countries did not want that meeting to have any formal outcomes, no decisions, no conclusions. So that was regrettable. And so we are really looking forward to the COP26, where hopefully we'll be able to meet in person and actually adopt decisions, making up for the lost time in both 2020 and in 2021. However, as AOSIS, a small island developing states, we ensure that we maintain the ambition that was required. In early 2020, Belize had hoped to convene the Placencia Ambition Forum in Belize, bringing together 100 to 150 participants to meet in person to see what we could do to drive ambition for COP26 in 2020. Unfortunately, the pandemic did not allow us to meet in person, but we then decided to convene a virtual forum. And in fact, I believe AOSIS set the standard for all future climate change involvement. Instead of 150 persons in Belize, we had 1,500 people who joined online, and we were able to have participants from around the world discussing ambition, and that really set the stage for further events during the year. The Petersburg Dialogue, the New York Climate Week, and other dialogues were held virtually, I think using the example that AOSIS did in Placencia in March of 2020. So I think we set the standard, and hence we really drove ambition, and the same message continues today. And so hopefully when we meet in Glasgow, it will bear fruit.
And Ambassador Fuller, I wanted to jump in before my colleague MC takes it over to Ambassador Friday, but I just wanted to point out, given that Belize served as chair of AOSIS over the last 2 years, it was fascinating watching Belize in its chairmanship adapt to the changing global circumstances. Certainly leaning more heavily on its digital reach and finding innovative ways to bring people together, but also in developing strategic partnerships. Ambassador Young, who of course was the chair of Belize during AOSIS chairmanship, joined actually the three of us last August for International Youth Day to announce that AOSIS was formally joining the Science Not Silence campaign. So the legacy of Belize's climate action in its chairmanship of AOSIS continues today, and it's such a privilege to have you join us, sir.
Thank you very much for that, and I will certainly pass on your notes of appreciation to Ambassador Young when I next speak to her. Thanks.
Please do.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Fuller and also Matt, for these remarks. But now moving on to Ambassador Friday. Looking back at AOSIS' 30 years history, what is the legacy of AOSIS, and how has this shaped the public perception of what is now widely regarded as a global climate crisis?
Well, first of all, many thanks for having me. And just to give a shout out to Ambassador Fuller once again. And, part of the legacy of AOSIS was really laid down by people like Ambassador Fuller, who've really been on the forefront of negotiations. And, as a result of that, you have, and many people, there's this legacy of AOSIS as the conscience of the convention. But let me start by saying, I just want to pick up on Matt's point about things coming full circle. Because indeed, back in the 1980s, it was the Maldives who started to organize and pull other countries, other islands together, saying, we need to do something about climate change, given, in fact, the situation in Maldives and the vulnerability to sea level rise, but not just Maldives, of course, many other islands. So I was very pleased to see Ambassador Thilmisa Hussein, on the dais, on the electronic dais just a moment ago. What the islands have done, I believe, is basically to set the bar and to set a very high standard for what we need to be thinking about in terms of climate change. AOSIS was one of the one of the key bodies that really promoted this idea of 1.5 degrees. If you go back to Copenhagen, for example, we know how those negotiations went. It wasn't the sort of ideal process and outcome that people had hoped for. But one of the key things that got into the language of Copenhagen was this idea of 1.5 degrees and ensuring that actually went into the text. That was further strengthened in Cancun the following year. And we see now, in fact, your entire campaign of Science Not Silence and the March for Science around 1.5. This is something that AOSIS played a key role, I think, in promoting within the UNFCCC for sure. And of course, there were other, there were other organizations involved as well. It wasn't just AOSIS promoting this. But I think that, and we see now when we see what's happening, just in terms of where we are in terms of temperature rise, we see all the wildfires taking place, in the western United States. We see the floods that happen in Germany. This is exactly what AOSIS, was saying. We cannot go to 2 degrees above, above pre-industrial levels. We really need to have 1.5 degrees as a critical marker. So I think this is one of the important things that AOSIS has been able to do. And, in calling for, separate Ipcc, a study on 1.5, etc. Of course, we know the challenges with that, but it's been, it's been small steps, and we are getting there. Very pleased, by the way, to see Antigua and Barbuda, in the chair of AOSIS now. They've played a critical role in all of this as well in the negotiations, over the years. As has Belize and other countries, and Maldives, of course. So really pleased to see the sort of lineup that you brought together here.
Ambassador Fuller, I want to follow up on Dr. Friday's remarks about kind of the role of AOSIS and really first planting that flag of 1.5 degrees within the UNFCCC. Of course, when people think about the Paris Agreement, the actual text of the Paris Agreement was a commitment of countries around the world to put forth climate goals, their nationally determined contributions to, I believe, quote, keep global temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius, with the inspired goal of 1.5. But of course, that 1.5 line in the sand of what the explicit goal was not a part of the Paris Agreement text. Following that, of course, there was an effort led by AOSIS to have the IPCC commission a report so that the world finally understood exactly what the implications of a 1.5 degree world would be. Can you talk about really how that happened behind the scenes, and really what you think the significance of that 1.5 degree report is in and of itself, but also what you think the significance of it will be when it is finally formally welcomed at COP26, we hope?
Sure, thanks. In fact, AOSIS response to climate change, and in fact, small island developing states' response to climate change, AOSIS's position in the climate change negotiations has been driven by the science. It is not something that we take out of the air. We actually look at the science, and that informs what our position should be going into our negotiations. So, as you rightly said, prior to Paris, countries had agreed 2 years before to submit intended nationally determined contributions to feed into the Paris Agreement. And when we looked at the aggregate result of those INDCs, we realized that it put us on a pathway towards closer to some 2.8 to 3 degrees above pre-industrial levels. When in fact, what the text of the Paris Agreement says is, as you said, 2 degrees with aspirational goals of 1.5. So obviously the two things did not match. And in fact, so we lobbied there. And if you look at the decision that adopted the Paris Agreement, it does state there that a decision says that the Ipcc is invited to prepare a report on the impacts of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so that is actually a decision that actually was adopted as a part of the Paris Agreement. And so the Ipcc then took on that challenge, but it was really the efforts of small island developing states, along with the LDCs, that said, look, at 2 degrees, we will not survive. And we asked the science to do further work, because our underlying science had already said it, but we wanted to bring it out into the international arena. And so indeed, the Ipcc took on that challenge and actually prepared that report. That, in fact, is now the talking point for almost anyone speaking about climate change, refers to that 1.5 degree report. It is not the AR4 which won the Nobel Prize. It was not the subsequent reports. It was that specific report, and it was a forewarner of what we're seeing now. As Angus just said, we're seeing the wildfires, we're seeing the flooding events, we're seeing catastrophic back-to-back Category 5 hurricanes across the Caribbean, longer hurricanes. We are now using the Latin alphabet regularly now because we run out of names for hurricanes. So what that 1.5 report presaged is indeed what we're seeing now. So indeed, we are very happy that the international community is now referring to the 1.5 report. The Secretary General, every time he speaks about the 1.5 report. Unfortunately, the COP, for political reasons, was unable to adopt the 1.5 report. We would be very, very pleased indeed if COP26 were to do so, because I think that would then set the stage for the subsequent Ipcc reports, AR6. We know Working Group 1 should be coming out in August. So we would certainly want to see that being spoken about at COP26, along with the 1.5 report and subsequent AR6 reports coming up next year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ambassador Fuller, for emphasizing how important it is not just to acknowledge the science in practice, but also to bring it into the UNFCCC. And the language and the wording of the text matters a lot in the consequences and how it is taken into consideration in the years to come. Ambassador Friday, for you, since serving as the chair of the EOSIS, a lot has changed over the last 15 years. During your tenure, it was probably not necessarily financially viable for governments around the world to transition towards renewable energy and resilient infrastructure. But now global marketplaces have come to such a point where national energy transitions are not only the right thing to do for the planet, but also the financially smart thing to do for governments. What are some of the remaining barriers that small island developing states have when it comes to achieving climate mitigation and adaptation goals while reducing cost of energy for their citizens?
Well, thank you very much for that point, and and for the question. Look, I think island states have a unique role to play as sort of living laboratories to demonstrate what can be done, because as the canaries in the coal mine, the challenges that island states are going to have are going to be some of the same challenges that other countries are going to have. So the sea level rise, for example, increasing intensities of cyclones, hurricanes, and so forth, storm surge, drought, flood, all of these things are challenges which the islands have been facing for some time, but we're seeing that the larger countries are now starting to experience some of these challenges. So it has always made sense to use financing, international financing, to actually help island states in terms of both renewable energy, putting in place renewable energy, and in terms of adaptation. Now, the renewable energy is a particularly interesting one because it's a lot easier from a financing point of view. One, you have established markets in place, you have payers, there's a commodity that people are prepared to pay for. Moreover, what we see happening in small island states is that the price of imported fossil fuel is actually quite high. In the Caribbean, for example, people are paying anywhere between 35 and 65 cents, US cents per kilowatt hour. Compare this with other places that may be paying between 8 and 15. But we know that, for example, with solar and wind, from a wholesale perspective anyway, this can be provided at prices much lower, anywhere between sort of 5 and 15 cents, depending on whom you ask. So there's a clear-cut business case for renewable energy, particularly for island states. Now, many islands have legal barriers which make it a little bit difficult. So people may have had, for example, very long-standing monopoly arrangements in place with their utilities. And in some countries, utilities are actually spearheading the way and wanting to see, governments sort of step up to the plate to make it a lot easier to put in place renewables. And in other cases, we see that utilities can be dragging their feet. So there is a sort of legal challenge there that has to be dealt with in some countries. In Grenada, we have just been through that scenario where we've had an incumbent utility provider with a transaction which was agreed to in 1994, basically gave them an exclusive right to provide power until 2074, I believe. So it was just an 80-year, exclusivity, which made it very difficult. In my view, mistakes were made on both sides, both the utility side and the government side. There are things that could have been done differently. In the end, this went to ICSID for arbitration. And in the end, it actually cost Grenada a lot of money to come out of those arrangements. And when I say a lot of money, I'm talking about, tens of millions over the market value of the utility. That being said, we are where we are. And in the case of Grenada, it's been a salutary lesson, in terms of where I think the international system could have been more responsible in understanding the new context of renewable energy. Renewable energy prices have come down considerably. We're very pleased with some of the, to learn about some of the developments. For example, the Island Resilience Partnership, is making in other countries. And, we think this type of model is very much one that more and more countries should be looking at. So certainly from a renewable energy perspective, there's a very clear-cut business case. We need to look at what's working in other countries and see how we can model those.
Dr. Friday, this idea of lessons learned and best practices, of course, is at the heart of the Samoa pathway. For those who aren't familiar with it, the Samoa pathway really was a convening in 2014, which put together a set of principles agreed to by nearly every island government in the world. And at the heart of it is the concept of genuine, durable partnerships and finding ways that we can take lessons learned and best practices and have not these projects done in isolation, but really using every project around the world to inform how other governments are trying to achieve success. We actually since we're talking to two distinguished diplomats in the Caribbean, it's worth noting our next scheduled speaker was supposed to be Prime Minister Severi Jacobs from St. Martin. Unfortunately, she's unable to join us. The St. Martin government family lost a colleague to COVID, and she is at their service. Really is a powerful reminder of the concurrent crises that the world still faces, and the importance of prioritizing the strengthening of the resilience, not just of our energy infrastructure, but our economy and public health systems as well. But Prime Minister Jacobs was going to announce that the St. Martin government had entered into a public-private partnership that was modeled after the partnerships in the independent state of Samoa and in the Kingdom of Tonga. And this is actually with the Island Resilience Partnership, which is one of the co-hosts of today's forum. And in fact, I do want to give a special recognition to the two governments who really helped pave the way. Izzy, could you briefly throw up the graphic that we had created to highlight our dear friends, Ambassador Tone with the Kingdom of Tonga, of course, in his leadership, and High Commissioner Faturi, the former permanent representative for the independent state of Samoa to the United Nations. It's worth noting that Ambassador Faturi actually launched the Science Not Silence campaign in Madrid on the margins of COP25. So his leadership and the leadership of the Samoan government has been very appreciated. But it's the leadership of Tonga and Samoa, not just focused on their national energy transitions and what is now a proven partnership in the Pacific, finding ways to replicate that and inform how other governments are achieving success. Thank you, Izzy. But yeah, this partnership with the St. Martin government, with the Island Resilience Partnership and Grid Market, which is an artificial intelligence company based in New York that essentially develops precise renewable energy projects and has a transparent marketplace for energy companies and financial institutions around the world to drive down the price and achieve the greatest impact as possible. And that is done for governments at no cost. In another life, probably when Ambassador Friday was the chair of AOSIS, I worked with in the Obama White House in public-private partnerships. And one of the things you realize in order to accelerate public-private partnerships is you need to find ways to create those partnerships where it doesn't require governments to put forth a tremendous amount of upfront resources. Oftentimes, that is not a luxury most governments have. And so the IRP is excited to find ways to support St. Martin in its national energy transition as well. And, again, at the heart of the Samoa pathway is this concept of genuine, durable partnerships. And there are certainly best practices out there, but there are a lot more. And to that end, we so appreciate the two of you joining us today. But we have one final question for you before we let you part. MC, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and also thank you, Ambassador Fuller and Ambassador Friday. So the final question to the both of you, as we are heading into COP26 in November, there is a great deal of uncertainty, right, about what can be accomplished, especially as most of the world lacks adequate access to vaccines, and climate ambition for much of the world remains very inadequate, right? So what gives the two of you hope, Ambassador Fuller and then Ambassador Friday?
Thanks. Indeed, we are very hopeful for COP26. We're working very closely with the UK incoming COP presidency to have an in-person session at COP26. And I believe the entire world is looking on us to ensure that we can deliver something. So I applaud the UK. The presidency is now trying to see how they can get vaccines to any potential negotiator to come to Glasgow. I think we also need to work on some safe corridors where people who have to in transit through countries can actually get to Glasgow. So I think these things are now coming in place. I'm heartened by the fact that the UN president of the GA is actually convinced that we should have an in-person General Assembly in September at the highest political level. So again, I think we can show that if the politicians, if presidents and prime ministers can come to New York, indeed, it will show that that we can get back to some sort of normalcy and we can meet. So we are really looking forward to that. And I believe the entire climate change community will be working as hard as possible to ensure that we get there with that idea that we will be meeting in person. That's what we had to plan for, and we are with each passing day we are moving towards that end.
Ambassador Friday.
Well, thank you very much. And let me just, I'll answer the question, but I just wanted to say a big thank you to AOSIS and the Permanent Mission of Antigua and Barbuda, to YOUNGO, the Permanent Missions of Fiji, Malta, the March for Science campaign, EarthX, and the Island Resilience Partnership. Thank you so much for having me. Look, what gives me hope is that this is coming during COVID, believe it or not. As one of the speakers said earlier, there is actually a link between COVID and climate, and that is the the unmistakable impact of science and the need to not ignore science or to do so at one's detriment. And so I think what COVID has done is to provide a crucible, to provide the world with a crucible in terms of what can happen when science is ignored, and actually how solutions can come together when countries work together, when civil society and private sector come together, and when there's political will to make resources available. Look, we've been talking for so many years in the climate negotiations about making $1 billion here, $1 billion there available for the entire planet. And we've seen that, we can't even sort of get to the type of commitment we were anticipating by 2020 in terms of the $100 billion or so. But yet, what we've seen with COVID is that countries are making trillions available, in response to this, almost, at the snap of their fingers. And we saw a similar thing, after the financial crisis. So there is a way to mobilize, significant amounts of funding at scale. So let us not continue this conversation about the financing is not there. What we've seen with COVID has really been a petri dish for, how we can sort of work together to solve some of these intractable problems. So, the development of vaccines in months rather than years, the rollout that's taking place right now, that is a type of approach that we need for climate change. And it comes not only with COVID in play, but where we're seeing a lot of these climate impacts playing out across the planet as well. So I think this confluence of events is very important. And my hope is that, people negotiating on behalf of islands, LDCs, and Africa will actually use some of the lessons learned to, point out things to developing countries as to, the level of ambition that's needed for climate, and to give practical examples drawing upon COVID as to what can be done when people work together, mobilize funding, bring the private sector together as well, civil society, and so forth. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Friday, Ambassador Fuller, it's really been an honor to have you both join us for the Science Not Silence Forum. Thank you for your climate leadership, not just today, but really over the decades to allow us to get to the point where we are. That has enabled a lot of the transformative change to really be possible. Thank you both for joining us, and we'll certainly be following up with both of you soon so that we can continue to align efforts as we head into COP26.
And thank you for the invitation, and keep up the great work. You're the guys who get us, push us to go further. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for your leadership from March for Science and for Youngo. Very much appreciated. And your affiliated organizations. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Friday. Yeah, we'll save you the 2 minutes it would take to list all of those organizations. No, we appreciate you both joining us. Thank you both.
Thank you.
So next up, we actually have a special announcement regarding Youngo, but I do want to, before we jump into that, I just want to make one final point. You know, we talked about the Samoa Pathway, which was launched in 2014. This is a 10-year commitment of island governments working together to share best practices and lessons learned. And the United Nations has really played an instrumental role in continuing that conversation going and finding ways to convene world leaders to share those best practices and lessons learned. The partnership that we just announced with St. Martin is a direct outcome of that effort. And so I want to, give a special thank you to Ms. Simona Marinescu, United Nations Resident Coordinator, as well as Mr. Riyad Madeb, who is the SIDS advisor for UNDP. Without their leadership and their support, the Island Resilience Partnership and Grid Market would have never met the St. Martin government, let alone Tonga and the independent state of Samoa. And so, oftentimes I think we look at these kinds of forums as one-offs that don't yet really accomplish anything. And I think looking at the legacy of that summit held in 2018 in Apia demonstrates what's possible when you have innovative and committed leaders. So with that, let's bring on our dear friend and colleague, Sahur. Sahur, are you there?
Hey, yes, can you hear me fine? Hello.
Yes, Sahur, thank you for joining us.
Hello, and hello to my focal points as well. Nice to see you there. You both are doing a great job. All three of you, actually.
Thanks, Sahur. Yeah, Sahur, you of course wear many hats as a youth climate leader. You are the contact point for the NDC working group, a part of Youngo, which is critically important, especially given the state of where NDCs are and the importance of youth becoming more involved in how their countries are putting forth their own climate goals. But you are also the global liaison for the Virtual Conference of Youth. Can you talk about what that event is, how it fits into Youngo, and is this the first time this event has ever been virtual?
Yes, thank you so much, Matt, for giving the opportunity, of course. So yeah, Youngo has been organizing the conferences of youth since years now. It's our signature event actually, but it's Youngo in its essence. We really believe on inclusivity. We really believe on making the major climate dialogues and understanding of the negotiations more accessible to the young people. And we believe that is the only way we can then get the voices of the young people into the outcome documents, right? And hence in the policies. So for the first time ever in our history, we are organizing the Virtual Conference of Youth, which is happening in two parts, basically. So the first part would be a completely separate event, which will be organized for young people who have not been getting a chance to maybe become a COI delegate, or because there are several elements we have to consider when we talk about being a COI delegate or being there physically at a conference of youth. That is a question of privilege, because you have to travel halfway around the world, and that is why we are organizing this first part of the Virtual Conference of Youth, which will be talking about in a very linguistically inclusive manner about different different negotiation topics, about the cross-cutting topics related to the negotiations, and basically giving them all the capacities that the young people need to give their input to the policy document, which will be fed into COI 16, and then for moving forward into COP26 as a joint policy document. So that is why this is a very innovative and crucial step in history, I think, in the history of Youngo that is happening, and everything to make the to make the policy documents, to make the climate and environmental policies more inclusive of the young people, especially of the young people from the vulnerable and marginalized communities. So this is the significance of the virtual conference of youth. And this is why we are so happy to announce that it's happening on the 12th of August, which also happens to be the International Youth Day. And all appreciation goes to the team of the virtual conference of youth, our focal points, and my fellow COI liaisons and younger members who helped us with their innovative ideas and who helped us keep pushing forward, moving forward with their innovations. So this is why the youth leaders are different, and this is why the young leaders are the future and the present. To make change happen. But also a special thanks to March for Science for being so supportive and so helping us in so many aspects of virtual conference of youth. I really appreciate that.
And Sahar, as we talk about the virtual conference of youth, of course, this is based on the Conference of Youth, COI, which has been taking place immediately preceding the COPs for the last 15, 16 years. HITA MC as the global focal points of Youngo. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how COI has evolved over the years in terms of how it's organized, and really what you all think the opportunity is for the very first virtual COI that will be taking place next month on August 12th, which is International Youth Day.
Yeah, I think this is, so over the years, of course, COI, it's now been 16 years that we've been having such a conference of youth. And the point, like Sarah said, is to ensure that youth voices are prepared, or that young people are prepared enough for the COP, but also that our demands for the COP, this is a space where we come together and have an outcome, which is given to the UNFCCC Secretariat and the COP presidency. And I think, of course, while it has changed in the way it has been planned and the way it has been programming, it has grown a lot more larger. Again, this year we will have to scale back because of the pandemic, but in general, the number of young people that now know about the COI, that come to the COI, is a lot more. I think the basic essence of what we've been trying to say over 16 years still remains the same. So the words are different, the people are different, but the essence is the same. We're still asking for a lot more ambitious action. And unfortunately, we're not seeing it over so many years. I think this is what makes it even more important to ensure that youth voices are not just been part of the process, but are actually heard and are taken into account and are acted upon. And I think Marie-Claire can delve a little bit into how the virtual COI is going to add on and what this year's COI we're also aiming at doing.
And MC, before you jump in, I just want to, for folks tuning in, just drive home this point. Youngo is not an organization. It is the official youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which means that it has a literal seat at the table to participate in how world leaders are determining how their countries and the world will move forward. So if you are a young person, which is defined by the UN as being under the age of 35, which just missed it, so close, please join Youngo. We'll throw the link in the chat on Facebook and YouTube to sign up. But it's an extraordinary entity, a part of the official architecture of the UN that elevates the voices of young people to meaningfully participate. So sorry, with that, MC, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt, for highlighting this. And indeed, the mechanism was actually set up back in 1992. I was not on the planet back then, but I think it's really remarkable that already back then.
Stop rubbing it in. All right, I was in middle school, I think.
Well, I think it's pretty remarkable that already back then, right, the world leaders realized that we need children and young people to be part of this conversation, because the UN is a party-driven process. Only the governments actually can vote, but we have with Youngo literally like an entrance to every single of the expert meetings. We have to enter into the rooms. We can write submissions and do speeches, which is normally not possible, right? And I think we also have to make use of this very well. That's why we are convening the Global Conference of Youth, because for us, not that there are just like Mary Claire and Hita there, but no, we want to be, or we are, an accessible, open, and very inclusive mechanism that every young person can simply sign up with the form you're going to share and be part of it. You do not have to be selected, you do not have to pay anything, but you can just be part and make your voice heard. And I think this is, on one hand, say it's so basic, but on the other hand, so important to maintain this. And that's why I think that the virtual format now makes us even more accessible, but because many young people are facing various challenges and barriers to participate, as Sahar already mentioned. So the virtual format gives us a new way on how we can collect even more voices and bring them directly to the negotiations and ensure that these voices, the ones we really need to hear, are as well taken into consideration. And I think with the local conference of youth, which is the local format, right, can be in a local language, to the local context, but still there is an outcome document at the end. And this one is going to the global conference of youth. And then we have the virtual conference of youth. So really try a lot of different ways on how we can be truly inclusive, that we are not just that inclusiveness and diversity is not only just a tag word, a buzzword, we are somewhere having like, as a statement, as so many others do, unfortunately, but actually we are living it. And I think this is a brilliant conference, Sahar, you're leading on to make our space even more accessible and truly meaningful.
Well, and I just want to say, I love how Youngo is really organized with that understanding of the importance of decentralized local leadership, because yes, it all does come together right before COP, with youth leaders from around the world actively participating in how Youngo will put forth its recommendations, its demands, the calls to action that it is rallying support around, like the Science Not Silence campaign. But really, there are so many different ways, as you're a part of Youngo, to be involved. I think there's at least a dozen working groups, from energy to ocean preservation to, you name it. There are opportunities to connect with young leaders around the world who are passionate about issues that, as a climate advocate, you care about. So look, as we head into next month, August 12th, International Youth Day, and virtual COI is being organized. Sahar, I want to turn it over to you. What makes, we talk about events kind of being these one-offs and not really having any major outcomes come out of it. But in the spirit of connectivity and finding ways to align efforts, what is going to make this virtual COI summit so interesting and unique in terms of connecting young leaders?
So that is a very good question, Matt. How we are planning to do is that Youngo will be launching a platform for the whole net, because we recognize that networking and communication is the crucial element of global COI happening, right? And it will be useless to say that we are trying to make it inclusive if we wouldn't be providing the same networking and communication tools, for example, to the youth leaders or youth delegates that would be there. So for this, to actually be inclusive in this regard as well, we will be launching a platform for young leaders, for youth delegates, and Youngo members to connect with each other and help each other better and to communicate better, especially on the policy documents as well as we move forward. But would be happy to announce furthermore on this as well when we explore the virtual conference of youth more, because it will be one of its elements. So yes, but I promise you that this is going to be very interesting, and it will allow every single young person to be a part of a single community and give their input.
I love that, Sahar. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for organizing this upcoming extraordinary global youth summit that really has an explicit goal of not just connecting young leaders who will be actively participating in this event, but actually launching a network of youth climate leaders to continue to collaborate as we head into COP26 and beyond. Sahar, you're the absolute best. Thank you for joining us, especially at like 1 o'clock in the morning. It's please get some sleep. You're a champ. Thank you very much, my friend.
Yes, I do that, and good luck to you all, especially to my friends Ida and Claire as well, with the rest of the event. I know you guys are rocking it, so good luck.
Awesome. Well, look, with that, we have our final speaker who's going to be joining us, Mr. Ernest Gibson. Hey, Ernest, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Well, we just spoke with someone who was, I believe, at around like 1:30 in the morning joining us. Of course, you've woken up at the crack of dawn to join us live as well, coming in from Fiji. Thank you so much for being a part of this. We really appreciate your time and commitments.
No, not a problem at all. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful. Good morning. Ernest, as a member of the SG's Youth Advisory Group, what are your priorities heading into COP26?
Sure. I think maybe one of the caveats to probably mention would be that the seven of us all have slightly different priorities going into COP, but I think that they all run through a very similar ethos. It's all about ensuring that this COP is as meaningful as it can be, and ensuring that it doesn't turn into what it could potentially be, which is a talk fest, and finding ways of ensuring that actually there are like a list of actions that come out of this particular event. And I think I mentioned it earlier in one of the previous sessions. COP isn't about this sort of single isolated event. It's part of a much larger chain of events, and finding ways of ensuring that we don't only add value throughout the week of COP, but also that there's significant follow-on effects that flow through afterwards. But from my end, I think that there are three things that are really kind of going into COP are particularly important. And the first one is, I think we really do need an action-oriented COP. We need tangible change now. I mean, all of us have had an assignment or two that we've kind of left right to the last minute, and this is kind of what that feels like. We've left this assignment to the very, very final, like moment that we can before we actually need to, for want of a better statement, pull our fingers out and do something. And I think this is that moment. We need to find ways of ensuring that adrenaline kicks in, and that we find actions that we need to take right now. As non-state actors, as young people, as governments, especially as the private sector, how do we ensure that this COP, after this COP, that there are action steps that need to be taken, but more important than just action steps that need to be taken, how do we ensure that we're also monitoring and evaluating this? And I think this kind of brings us to the second point that I wanted to make about a key priority going into COP, and it's ensuring that we can strengthen our reporting mechanisms, because I still think that this is a significant gap that we have. It would be great. This is kind of the utopia, the ideal. If we could see governments that don't hold up to their end of the bargain actually facing significant repercussions. I'd like to see governments that we know who've worked extremely hard to ensure that the goals that we have towards the climate crisis are met, actually use the diplomatic kind of positions that they have and the relationships that they have with countries that have been misbehaving particularly, and say that there are certain repercussions that you're going to face, and one of these is the way in which we interact as nation states, and to be able to actually draw that hard line. And I think that that's something that we've yet to see really be driven home, because I mean, we've seen this far too often. We've seen countries show up time and time again to the COP process and make disappointingly unimaginative targets, but also not even meet those targets that aren't particularly good. So that's something that troubles me. And then the last one is genuine targets from countries across the board. Quite frankly, I'm tired of SIDS being the most ambitious countries in the room. Why is it that it's kind of ridiculous that countries that contribute the absolute least to the problem are the ones that are being relied upon to do the most in terms of cleaning up the mess? And I think that's morally wrong. But also just like logistically isn't the smartest thing, because it means that we aren't actually having the targets nor the action that we need. So yeah, it's around ensuring that it's an action-oriented COP, that we can strengthen the way that we monitor and report countries, so that we don't have countries like some that are sitting within the Pacific Ocean that we know of, that find loopholes to the way that they can report on the targets that they've made. And then lastly, ensuring that these targets are as genuine, but also as effective as possible.
And Ernest, I just want to point out, for those who are unfamiliar, you are a member, as Hita noted, of the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group. Of course, this is really the first of its kind, launched last year with you and 6 other youth climate leaders from around the world. Special shout out, Vlad, Nathan, Sophia, Nisreen, Archana, and Paloma. All 7 of you were kind enough to join the 3 of us on Earth Day to really highlight the work that you've been doing. But I want for folks who are tuning in to really understand the role that you all have, and really the unique opportunity as young people to actually inform how world leaders are addressing the climate crisis. But MC, I know you had a question.
No, actually, Hita, go next.
Thanks. Hi, Ernest, and a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us at this hour. I was wondering if you have any recommendations for COP26 on how to include voices of young climate leaders so that they're meaningfully contributing to the state of the global climate action.
Sure. I always worry when people, kind of oversell the good morning to me, because it must mean that I look particularly terrible with a morning face. Good.
No, not at all. It's almost 1 a.m. here, so if I totally understand what you're saying.
No, I think that's a great question, Hita, and I think Hita and I have kind of been in a virtual space before where we've had this same sort of discussion around different things, and I suppose my answer for youth engagement never really changes in terms of what the framing is, and it's around ensuring that the engagement, whether it be at COP, whether it be at pre-COP or any other kind of engagement space, it needs to ensure that it's 3 things: that it's continuous, that it's circular, and that it's deliberate. And so what does this mean in the context of COP? Continuous engagement means that the engagement doesn't stop during the week of COP. Young people need to be involved in the events that precede COP. The lead up to COP is extremely important, but also in everything that takes place after COP as well. I think there's a tendency to kind of spotlight the main event itself, which is COP26, obviously, but there is so much that takes place on either side of the COP week, and it's really important that we find ways of ensuring that young people are deliberately involved in those engagement spaces as well. And it's like what it is with every project or program that we implement. Young people need to be involved from the get-go. When we're planning what COP looks like, when we're ensuring what the pre-COP looks like, this needs to be worked extremely closely with young people. And I know that Youngo has been working particularly closely with the COP presidency, so I know that we're in good hands in that stead. And I suppose this is like it's kind of really helpful to me to see the way Youngo works over the last sort of 6 to 12 months. It's been fantastic, and I really have to take my hat off to Hita and Marie Claire and the team. It's been wonderful. But also it needs to be continuous, but it also needs to be circular. There needs to be a level of 360 reporting that takes place. I found, and I'm sure others on this call have also found, when you go to whether it be at the HLPF, whether you go to the ECOSOC or UNGA, or whether you're at COP, there's this enormous pressure on young people to demonstrate why we're there, that we have some level of expertise, that we've been working in the climate movement for a significant period of time, to be able to demonstrate kind of that we have an ability to add value to that conversation. But equally, we need to ensure that reporting and that same level of pressure on demonstrating our qualifications and our kind of agency for being there needs to be applied to leaders as well. And that's really important, because it means that when we're going into COP, we're starting on a relatively even playing field, that young people are in a position where we're able to actually hold leaders to account. And this is a conversation that we've had time and time again, because it's one thing for a young person who works for a very small organization, who's kind of self-funding everything they do while working 2 part-time jobs, to be able to make it to COP, but then to be able to actually institute substantive change is very difficult, because we don't have the auspices of something like the United Nations behind us, ensuring that there's a level of protection and support that's in place. And so that's really important. And like, we know that it sort of, this support mechanism is slowly getting there, but I don't think that it's fully built into the COP process. And that needs to be done to ensure that we can facilitate young people to be able to actually call out leaders in a safe way. Because we've seen across the board, young people who do this time and time again often face repercussions for being the ones that stand out. And so that's really important to ensure that youth engagement takes place in a sort of unhindered manner. And then the last one is the engagement needs to be deliberate. Very often, young people are added as these kind of splashes of color or like pops of interestingness in what can be quite boring negotiation processes. And that's really not how it should be. Young people are there because of the agency and the capacity and the expertise that they have to offer. We need to be seen as value adds as opposed to kind of great photo opportunities. And really what that requires of leaders is that young people are there in a capacity where they can actually institute change. Because if young people are there solely to speak on panels, that's not instituting change. Young people need to be given the training, but also the same level of respect during negotiation processes during COP, but also on the events that take place on the periphery. So ensuring, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider, but I think these 3 things are particularly important for youth engagement.
Well, Ernest, we're gonna wrap it up with this final question, which I think you're a great person to end it with, given your role, but also being a citizen of a small island developing state. Obviously you understand the importance of the global community increasing its climate goals, elevating the ambition of the NDCs, so that it's more adequately addressing the climate crisis. I think Heather MC noted earlier, the NDC synthesis report came out several months ago that showed that over the next decade, we're looking at a 2% reduction of the world's current carbon footprint, which I think in order to hit the 1.5 degree report, that needs to be closer to 40%. So, with that in mind, as we head into COP26 and really look for tangible outcomes that are going to make a difference and understanding what's possible. Of course, this COP being a very unique COP, because this is the first COP where there hasn't been a preliminary meeting in Bonn that really sets the stage for really what will already happen. There's a lot of unknowns going into this year's COP in Glasgow. Can you talk about what the significance would be for the Ipcc 1.5 degree report, which again has been blocked at the last 2 United Nations climate change conferences? What the significance would be for it to be finally formally welcomed?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there is a global significance that not only applies to small island developing states like my own and others in the region, and that is that how can we expect to achieve the targets that we need to achieve if we cannot actually have the fundamental document that demonstrates actually how bad we're doing and how far we need to get? That, for me, that baffles me. If we can't actually accept what the genuine target needs to be, how are we able to then create targets and nationally determined contributions in a way that will actually reach that goal? And so, I mean, thinking about it that way, just from a practical sense, blows my mind that it hasn't yet taken place. But maybe just to kind of paint a picture of what it looks like as it currently stands for countries like my own. Last year, we had sort of border closure for COVID-19 in around March. When we had our first lockdowns, we then also at the same time had a Category 4 cyclone. And then in December, we had another Category 5 cyclone. And then in January, we had a Category 4 cyclone. This is not normal, I think is really important to mention, that you should not be having 3 cyclones above a Category 4 within a sort of 7 to 9 month period. That's not normal. And then you add on to that Fiji is not one of the most vulnerable countries within our region of 14 countries. You have countries that are low-lying atoll states. And this means that there is already a level of vulnerability that takes place when it comes down to access to fresh water, when it comes down to sort of the general geographical space in trying to find ways of ensuring that we aren't so completely taken by sea level rise. But also there's a level when sea level rise takes place, like it's not just about an island completely being washed over, it's an entire group of people. It's people whose lives and cultures have been founded on that particular landmass. And so that's something that needs to be thought about. And so when I think about going back to that first point about how if we can't look at the beast in the mirror, which is ourselves, to find ways of bettering what we're doing, then how can we expect to ensure that we're saving the thousands and millions of people in my region, in other parts of the world that are actually facing some of the most severe natural disasters that they've faced in their lifetimes? How do we ensure that entire populations aren't completely wiped out? How do we ensure that countries aren't being forced to move to places that they don't call home? How do we ensure that all the social implications that are associated with that can be prevented if we aren't finding ways of ensuring that we're able to see what that problem is? So I think for me, and you have to be hopeful, when this gets formally endorsed and accepted, then we're in a position where we can say that's our goal, and these are the steps that we're going to do to ensure that we reach there.
Brilliant. Well, Ernest, thank you so much for really driving home that idea of this campaign trying to redefine success for the climate movement. And it's a real privilege to have had you join us today. Thank you, sir.
No, thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure. I might go back to sleep. It's a Saturday. So.
Well earned, my friend. Well earned. Thank you, sir. Well, look, we had actually initially planned to close with some final remarks from Ambassador Prasad from the Permanent Mission of Fiji to the United Nations. Of course, if you've been tuning in, you're probably well aware that we're nearly an hour over our allotted time that we had planned. Part of that, though, of course, is so many great speakers, so much to cover, and a lot of insightful comments that we wanted to build upon. Unfortunately, he's no longer able to join us, but a special thank you to the Permanent Mission of Fiji for being an official co-host. So look, to close this out, when Ambassador Webson, chair of AOSIS, really kicked this off, he gave a special shout out to the 17 governments that had united behind the science and had formally pledged to support the Science Not Silence campaign. But literally, as this event has been happening, we've been getting responses from other governments that have stepped up and answered that call to action. This is in large part to the work that AOSIS has been doing of reaching out to governments and asking them to formally join, and really serving as a launching pad that we will all be focused on moving forward to ensure that more and more countries step up and respond to this call to action. But MC, we've got a few more countries to highlight that are formally a part of the Science Not Silence campaign.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt. So it's our privilege to announce that Mozambique, Ireland, Israel, and the Dominican Republic have formally joined the campaign, the Science Not Silence campaign, and the government now has 21, right, countries who have supported our call to action. But yeah, that's only the start. We have heard throughout the evening today, or whatever time it was on your side of the world, how much effort there is from various sides, and we are very much looking forward, really gearing up, and Youngo is here to support. And yeah, we are very much looking forward to grow to 196.
I mean, look, MC Hita, we're looking at a campaign being led by young climate advocates, science advocates, island leaders, all uniting the world behind the science. This is an achievable goal. We have an opportunity to redefine success for the climate movement at COP26 and really draw that line in the sand, building upon what AOSIS and island governments have been calling for decades. This idea of 1.5 to stay alive. And so for those of you who have joined us, thank you for participating. A special thank you to our co-hosts, Permanent Mission of Malta to the United Nations, Permanent Mission of Fiji to the United Nations, AOSIS, Island Resilience Partnership, EarthX, of course, Youngo, and our colleagues at March for Science. It has been a real privilege hosting the Science Not Silence Forum as an official side event of the high-level political forum, which is concluding today. And so we will look forward to working with all of you to build upon today's momentum as we move forward and continue to unite countries and governments and world leaders and climate leaders to actually step up and achieve something that is possible, which is getting the Ipcc 1.5 degree report to finally be formally welcomed at COP26 in Glasgow this November. Hita, MC, my friends, my colleagues, thank you both for co-moderating today's event. I hope you both get some sleep very soon.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.